Workshop on domestic violence. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Sarah Shute from the Center for Women and Families. I'll let you take it over.
Thanks. I'm Sarah. My last name is actually Schultz. I know it's really that's all right, don't worry about it. It's so really challenging with the mess of syllables and one syllable, lots of vowels, so it's people. I'm the training coordinator at the Center for Women and Families. I'm also the sexual health advisor at the University of Louisville Promotion Office, so I have some dual roles. My background is sex education, lots of liberal arts stuff in between, but I come at this kind of from a very sex positive, healthy perspective, so I bring a lot of that. But this is not unfortunately what we're talking about today, but we will be chatting a little bit about that. What we're focusing today on is intimate partner violence, which is kind of the newer terms for domestic violence. And we're also going to be addressing what sexual assault can look like. And I know that everyone here is faculty or staff at JCTC, and so this has been something that's popped up here and there with students, either you're suspecting or they're coming with you to you with disclosures. So hopefully this will be an opportunity to understand what these topics look like and how they play out in your students' lives, and also how to respond effectively in your settings. We start from a very, what's called a trauma-informed care approach. Basically, has anybody heard of that here? You have, wonderful. That's really great and unusual. So just a brief background on that trauma-informed care. We like to create a space not only for the clients that we work with, but also anyone that I come in contact with training, and with the understanding that we want to empower you, to give you safety, collaboration, choice. So that's kind of embedded in what we do and how we facilitate information as well. That being said, we are going to be talking about a lot of pretty tough stuff today. So statistically speaking, there may be survivors in the room or those of you who know survivors. So it might strike a chord with you. And if it does, and you need to take care of yourself, I invite you to do so. So that means that just briefly you check your phone because you want to check out for a second, not because I'm boring and you're looking at Facebook. But if you need to step outside of the room, get some water, go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do, you're all adults. I empower you, I encourage you to take care of yourselves first and foremost. Can we all agree to that?
Yes.
Excellent. With that being said, we know that you are coming in contact with folks in your student. Come on in. Welcome. Please sign.
I'm not sure I'm in the right place.
Is it for the domestic violence?
Yes.
Yes. Sign in and take
Thank
those.
you. Sorry.
That's right. No worries. Just so you know, it's so part of that kind of trauma-informed care is, and hopefully we'll invite you to think about this, kind of tweak your understanding of the students that come through your door. That most folks are experiencing trauma of some sort if they've already experienced it or are currently experiencing it. And that doesn't necessarily mean just domestic violence, it can mean other traumatic events. So they've been exposed to some sort of violence, abuse, neglect, or other traumatic experiences, and as a result, they're going to have a variety of different reactions. So keeping that in mind as you work with your students is very important. So let's just kind of dive into some of the facts and statistics around intimate partner violence. We're going to look at what I call IPV, intimate partner violence, first, and then we will address sexual assault after that. So about a quarter of women and about 10% of men have experienced some sort of sexual violence, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner, and have reported significant short or long-term impacts, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, symptoms, and injury. This is a really heavy statistic, but know that it is predominantly females, women, who are victims, with about 85% of intimate partner violence being female victimization. Any idea, well, we'll get back to that in a second. We know that it is the leading cause of serious non-fatal injury to women in the US. It's the #1 reason they visit the ER, more so than muggings, rape, and car accidents combined. So intimate partner violence has long-lasting and far-reaching effects, not just on physical health, but mental and a variety of different things as well. We know about a third of women and about 5% of male homicide victims are killed by an intimate partner. Of course, this is why we know that when a woman is murdered, her male partner, if she has one, is the first to be on that suspect list. Because statistically speaking, it's most likely him. And victims of intimate partner violence have higher rates of depression, anxiety, and substance abuse than the general population. Unfortunately, we only have an hour and a half with you folks, so we can't really get into why that is. But just know that there's a very clear intersection between those who are experiencing violence, and I would argue lots of other types of trauma or childhood trauma, and mental health issues such as anxiety, PTSD, bipolar, ADHD, these things that seem to be certain things but might be coming from trauma, as well as substance abuse, and then we'll get into why that is. Any questions about any of the statistics so far? Any thoughts? As much as possible, I'm going to try and make this as interactive as possible. I don't really like to lecture too much. I think the more we have conversation and make it something that we can own, the more it sinks in. So feel free to share.
Do you have some of the scopes on that, the family, historical connections to
Absolutely.
abuse as well?
Absolutely. So just to touch on that, although it's not up on this particular board, there's a definite correlation, a positive correlation between those who were raised in families where there was violence, and not just violence, but other types of trauma. Again, we have such a small time to talk to you folks, but if you want to write down in the notes to look further, there's a study called the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And I'm going to write this, even though I know the video can't capture it, but I'm going to write this up here just so you guys can spell it. So it's the ACEs study. It was out of the 1990s. Adverse Childhood Experiences. And if you look that up, you will find plenty of information on it. Fascinating stuff. They studied 10 different ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and they looked over the lifespan of about 18,000 participants. And what they discovered was that a lot of people have trauma and it has far-reaching effects. And so that is a small summation of that, but the effects on mental health, choices that you make, which really I would argue are not choices, they're just kind of inevitabilities because of the way you're raised. It's about fertile soil, and if there's not a lot of fertile soil, then how well can we grow? It's a fascinating study, so I encourage you to look more at that. Okay, sorry about that. I'm not used to the clicker. But just for our purposes, let's go ahead and look at the legal definitions as they stand right now, and hopefully this is going to change soon in Kentucky. But as of right now, this is the legal definition of what domestic violence and abuse is in the state of Kentucky. And then this is the one relative to intimate partner violence. And so for this one, if you can read this on your own, let's try and figure out, let's just look at this one specifically and see what type of abuse is not litigated. Which is the one that we're not seeing up there? You may not know. Go ahead and take a second to read that. So we see physical injury, sexual abuse, assault, fear of imminent physical, so intimidation is litigated against. What's the one that's really kind of stands out, maybe to you hopefully, that you can't really prove? Emotional, yeah, emotional, verbal, psychological. That one's very hard to detect, and arguably can be far more devastating than physical sometimes. So as far as relative to intimate partner violence, who is protected? This is kind of the part of talking who's protected and who's not. So it says current and former spouses. So this is who you can get an emergency protection order out against. A current or former spouse, couples who live together, or couples who have a child in common. Bingo, dating partners. And you may have been hearing a lot of this in the news recently, which we're part of that. We've been on that, it's been going back and forth, House to Senate. It's now House Bill 8. Sometimes it gets stuck in the Senate, sometimes it gets stuck in the House for whatever reason, and then dies. But we think at this point it's not going to pass. So we're hoping that this is going to be a slide from the past. Yes?
And it might be other, the same-sex partners have the same
That's
right to,
They can. Of course, they can never in this state be considered married.
right.
But if they do live together, it is recognized, and some do adopt, so that is recognized as well. But of course, the married part is not. But the vast majority of folks who are dating, whether they're straight, bi, or gay,
Right.
they don't have those rights as of right now, and we're hoping that will be changing very shortly. So what population that you probably work a lot with, at least on that low end, is really affected by this? What age group? Yeah, teens, right? They don't, especially maybe even a little young, maybe if you get them right at the beginning, they might be having a few 17-year-olds perhaps. They have very few rights because they cannot, they're all dating, they're probably not going to be getting married. In the state of Indiana, now if you have students who are from Indiana who come here, they do have the right to, if they're dating, to file an EPO, even if they're a minor. So all they have to do is talk to their parents or their guardian, and that parent or guardian can take out that EPO, emergency protection order, out of their name. Or they can do it themselves if they are 18 and on. So hopefully we will be with Indiana soon. But for our purposes, let's go ahead and just focus on a practical definition of intimate partner violence, which is a pattern of behaviors used by one person to gain and maintain power and control over another person in an intimate relationship. There should be hopefully a few words popping out at you that are most operative in this definition. Bingo. Power and control. That's a big one we're going to talk about. That you kind of got a little bit of a cheat sheet beforehand, but there's another one that's, I would argue, equally important. One more.
Pattern.
Bingo. Pattern. Why? Why do you say pattern? Why is that an important word?
It's more than an isolated incident, it's an ongoing.
Right, exactly. This is more than an isolated incident. It's happening day in, day out, maybe hourly. It's something that can whittle away someone, and that's exactly correct. So let's go ahead and turn our attention to that power. This is the one, this is the Duluth model we use. Previous to this, there's a model that was in fashion was the cycle of violence. Has anyone heard of the cycle of violence? Okay, yeah, it's pretty well known. The idea being that there was, every relationship starts off with hearts and flowers, everything's wonderful, you kind of pop your finger for a little bit, and then all of a sudden there's this acute incident. And an acute incident?
I'm sorry, but a lot of noise is coming from next door.
Oh, okay.
I want you to wear that. if you would,
Okay,
please.
no problem. Okay. Is that okay? Can you hear me? I'm not really used to miking, so I'll put this on. So, cycle of violence, there's an acute incident, and that might be a verbal accostation, that could be a physical one. And then there's, I'm so sorry, I love you, it won't happen again. And then there's, of course, that hearts and flowers stage. Then there's this building of tension, acute incident. And then again, hearts and flowers. But over time, that hearts and flowers goes away, the tension building increases, and those acute incidences happen more frequently. While I hear from a lot of our therapists on staff at the Center for Women and Families that is still a valid model for a lot of our clients, it doesn't encompass the wide range of abuse cycles and situations that a lot of our clients find themselves in. So this is definitely a more inclusive model. Just to kind of give you a little housekeeping on it, there's a perforated line between all of these different pie pieces, namely because these don't happen in isolation. There's kind of a co-occurring nature for these different types of abuse. I like to start usually with the using isolation because that's how most relationships start off with. I mean, it can be a positive, healthy relationship. We start off being somewhat consumed by that new person. And so there might be some limited contact with family and friends, but eventually, at least in healthy relationships, we kind of get back to normal. And but in an abusive one, this is oftentimes much more manipulative and kind of premeditated on the offending partner's part. So this can look like limiting contact. It can be something that the family and friends support system of that victim doesn't even recognize is going on. It can be as simple as that person saying, the perpetrator saying, I'm not going to go to that party. You're allowed to go, but you need to be back here in 1 hour. So allowing a certain time frame for that person to do that interaction, but then really restricting how much time they spend with their family and friends. It can also be checking the odometer, making sure that that person's not going somewhere they're not supposed to go. This can be even more overt, but can be kind of covered in a loving gesture of, honey, you don't have to work anymore. I've got this great job. It's going to take us to another part of the state or a different part of the country. And that person then picks up and moves, but they have been, ostensibly taken away from all of their support structures. So isolation can take on a variety of different things. We see it in our teen population, namely with giving your partner your Facebook password, right? And you might see this in your classroom a lot, where, oh, no, it's okay, he's got mine, I've got his. Why, right? So keeping that kind of, that kind of codependency is part of that, I think. So the isolation's a really important part of that, and often is the beginnings of it. What does emotional abuse look like? What can that look like? What kind of things are considered emotionally abusive? And you have a cheat sheet in front of you.
I mean, some of the things that they say.
Okay, like?
I mean, they can downgrade you.
Absolutely. There's a lot of name calling. You're stupid, you're lazy, you're no good.
Nobody else will want you.
Nobody else is going to want you. No one else will love you like I love you. You're not, but that's even a little bit different. But
Right.
but it's still part of that mind control. What other things could someone say or do that is considered emotional abuse?
When they tell you how they're feeling, you minimize it. Don't worry about that. You'll get over it. It's not a big deal.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important one. Minimizing someone's feelings or blaming them for things that are happening. The mind games of making them feel like they're crazy or what they're doing is causing the problems in the relationship. So that kind of mind game, psychological control. Right, so these are some examples. We would consider yelling and shouting at someone also a form of emotional abuse. And what this does over time is it really whittles away at somebody's self-esteem, somebody's feeling of self-efficacy. They begin to believe that they are deserving of the treatment that they're receiving. And this is a big issue and oftentimes a reason why a lot of folks stay. So using physical abuse, this could or could not, yes?
I'm sorry. Did you say this could be a reason why people stay?
Stay in a relationship. Yeah, because if you're thinking that you deserve it and that you're constantly being told you're not going to do any better or you're fat or you're lazy, they may believe that. And after time, it's going to have an effect on whether they decide to stay or go. All right. We'll get back, we're going to get into that a little bit more deeply. So physical abuse can, or doesn't have to be part of that cycle of abuse. And oftentimes it's not going to happen right away. It might happen later, a few months in, or after they're married, or there's children involved. So it might be something that the victim never thought that their partner would do, and all of a sudden now their partner is physically abusive. And this can be, of course, hitting, choking, burning someone, using threatening gestures. We would also consider this to be go ahead and sign in and take those, you're fine. We would also consider someone being forced to use drugs or alcohol, which is part of the abuse cycle. We see that quite often with one way of keeping that person tied to you is if they need you for something. And that can be that drug or alcohol addiction that perpetrator has forced the victim to become addicted to. Let's go ahead and go to 3 o'clock at privilege. What's this word privilege mean? We know it exists in our culture, so this is an important time to talk about it. What kind of privilege, and what is privilege, and how does it play out in an abusive relationship?
Privilege would be having a superior right, having more rights.
That's right. So an assumed advantage, assumed social status or space in a society where someone is valued more than another person. What kinds of privilege do we see that might play out in this kind of situation? Educational. So there may be a partner who's more or less educated. So the one who's more educated might feel that they can use their education, use their big vocabulary, use that social status that they've attained through that to wield power over their partner. The big one that we see a lot, of course, and we kind of start with is because there's such a heavy predominance of male perpetration, the male privilege, which is deeply embedded into our kind of social fabrics, right? Our Judeo-Christian and Muslim faiths, the man is the head of the household, and what he says goes. So it takes a pretty big focus in a lot of the stuff that we see. Of course, we do have males who are victims that we work with, so that doesn't apply here. So there's other kinds of privilege too. Anybody, can you think of any others? Financial privilege, absolutely, and we're going to get to that right here because that plays a huge role. Yes?
Whoever holds the lease or owns the house.
Sure, so having that kind of property control, right, which would also tie into the financial. There's also language. We have a lot of victims, or clients, I should say, who come to this country who don't have a full grasp or a very good grasp of the language. And they're really dependent on their partner, who may also be from the same country, who's been here maybe a little longer, or who's from this country, who has a very comfortable grasp of how things work here. And they're kind of entrusted to navigate and that entire culture for their partner. So we know that there's a lot of possibility for abuse there. There's a client that we worked with who she was brand new to the country. Her husband had been here for quite some time, so they were from a Latin American country. So she only spoke Spanish, and she was pregnant. She was going to a prenatal visit with the doctor that her husband had set up. And throughout the course of that doctor visit, he's translating everything for her, right? He's there in the exam room, which is also quite unusual for most of the women here. Would probably find that a bit uncomfortable to have their male partner potentially being there all the time, translating everything. And so, unfortunately, what she came to discover was that the doctor was performing an abortion, and she had no idea, nor did she have any. She was never going to consent to that, but her husband had used power and control in that situation because he had a better grasp of the language. So that's kind of an example of not only that language privilege, but what we would also consider reproductive abuse, which falls under sexual abuse. We know that folks that have a disparity in abilities, either cognitive or physical abilities, so if you know someone who, or you've come in contact with folks who there's a wide range in that, so that somebody who's totally dependent on another person for their care, there is a higher likelihood of abuse being in that as well. So I do want to mention same-sex issues as well, because we know that in certain couples, maybe one person hasn't come out to their family and friends or their coworkers, and so that can be used by their partner as something to wield against them. So we see this happening in that situation too, where they are how open they are about their sexuality. Any questions about privilege? Any other ones that I did not mention that you've thought of? Okay. So we've kind of touched on financial abuse a little bit. What can that look like in an abusive couple? Someone mentioned somebody having property control, so the deed. How else can this play out?
Access to healthcare.
Access to healthcare, absolutely. Maybe someone doesn't have, maybe they don't have their own insurance and they're dependent on the other partner for their insurance. What else?
No accessibility to, say, to connected finances. They have to come to them for all of their money needs.
Absolutely. Maybe they don't have a job, or maybe they've not been allowed to have a job, or maybe they had a job, or they were going to school and that was interrupted by that partner. We have a lot of that issue. We're developing a domestic violence in the workplace program because a lot of employers are not able to handle the domestic violence once it comes into their establishment. It's a huge issue. And it causes most employers to go, I have to let this person go. They're causing, and it's not that person's fault, but they're inadvertently putting them in more of a financially abusive situation. And that's the intent of that offending partner. Any other, yeah?
Well, I don't know if it might be tied into the financial piece. With what I do, I had a student where her partner would sit outside the door when she worked.
That's keeping tabs on somebody, that's isolation,
Yeah.
that's intimidation maybe, that's also...
Per se had control over the check and everything. It was the direct deposited into his account.
That's a clear example of financial abuse. And now if that was something where they're on the same level and that's understood that he doesn't make as much and but once that power imbalance is this is where the abuse lies, in that imbalance. So yeah, you're probably possibly thinking of at least, experiences personally, professionally, maybe in pop culture where you're seeing these kinds of things play out. It's quite pervasive. We know the statistics are pretty high. So, financial abuse can also be somebody, one of the clients that we had was a male victim. It was also somebody who wasn't very cognizant of how things work in this country. He was not from here. His female partner had married him abroad, brought him back, and got him to get a bunch of credit cards in his name, and then confiscated them and racked it up. So just ruined him financially. Which can ruin you for years and years and years to come, and any opportunity that you can have is totally tainted from that. So, we see abuse happening from both ends of that gender divide.
I had interesting, not interesting in a good way, so it caught me off guard. A student in the fall whose male partner used financial abuse to try to disconnect her from her education, paid for part of the tuition, and then refused to give her money for books. And she didn't have another way of getting books, and so she's trying to navigate this college system. And thankfully, somehow we wound up having a conversation, and anyway, navigated that. But it never occurred like that way of manipulating money.
Absolutely.
It just totally caught me off guard.
We have a lot of, I work with med students, we have standardized patient work. So, the patient comes in that's got a story, and the medical students got to kind of figure out what the patient history and what those symptoms are. One of the patient histories is a pregnant woman who only gets $50 a week for everything. Right? And she's responsible, everything, food, bills. That just is not, you're not going to be able to feed yourself on that much money if you're pregnant and you have a child. So that's one of the red flags for that med student to pick up on, and that would be another flag, right? That student's struggling because they're in a situation where they have been put into a space where they can't make ends meet. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. Any other examples that you can think of?
This is not financial. I'm not sure exactly where it fits there, but I had a student who was told by her partner that if she didn't pass the course, that she was banished, and she was from another culture.
Right.
She wasn't passing the course.
Right. And what were the reasons behind her not passing the course, first of all? Okay.
Well, some of it was he burned her books.
Okay, so.
She was under a lot of that. So right before the big exam, he took everything out and burned it.
Right.
And some of it was a language problem for her.
Absolutely.
In nursing, it's very difficult when you're a native English speaker.
Absolutely. English
so
language learning is challenging.
There were a lot of things against her.
And he was part of that, but he was also, huge. So it sounds like from a different culture. What culture were they from?
I can't remember which country in Africa she was from, but
Was it, Muslim or, could be Muslim or Christian, either way, could have been part of that male, female, in a lot of African cultures. I lived in West Africa, which was I lived in Senegal, West African. There's a very big imbalance in those situations, polygamy and what have you, but I'm not necessarily putting any value to that, but there's just that imbalance of power, and when women don't have a say or opportunity.
She had left him with the children.
Oh, wow.
At that point, but it was still where she was it was financial in some ways, but it was a whole lot more.
Right. So it sounds like there's financial, there's emotional abuse. Somebody burning your books, a tool that you need to achieve, I would consider that in financial abuse, because he's interrupting her opportunity to better herself. He's using privilege. He's saying, I'm banishing you. Who has a right to banish another person anywhere, right? So there's probably some privilege that's going on there. Who knows what else she wasn't telling you? We'll get back to that, but let's go ahead and let's pop over. I'm gonna skip sexual abuse, and then we're gonna talk a little bit about how children can be used when there are children involved. How might children be used to in this kind of violent cycle? What do you, and I'm encouraging you to think at all age development, because they can be used in different ways based on where they are in their development too.
Taking children away from proving she's an unfit mother.
Yes.
Saying she's an unfit mother and taking the children.
Bingo, yeah, that's a big one, right? Saying you're unfit. If that person's has had her using drugs or alcohol, or she's coping by using, that can be another thing that can be used against her. If she's undocumented, another issue that could be used to custody of the children. That's a bargaining tool. How might a child be used as a pawn? Visitation, yeah. We know there's a lot of violence that happens when there's a separation. Now there's more of a protection around when you can get an emergency protection order and how that works with visitation once that protection order becomes a domestic violence order. We'll talk a little bit about that. But that time in between when visitation's happening, maybe the perpetrator is saying terrible things about the victim, and there's a sense of brainwashing that's happening to those children.
My sister had a student whose father forced her to testify against the mother in order to win custody, which ended up being untrue. But
yeah, that's a great example, forcing a child. And a child is never going to choose between the two parents. They love their parents, and they have a really hard time, maybe even a harder time than we do as adults, differentiating between what somebody does and who someone is. And so, they cannot like that. I don't like it when daddy does that or mommy does that, but they still love their parent, even if that person is doing some really terrible things.
And sometimes the children take on the role as, I'm going to protect my mama, so.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I don't have a lot of time to talk about children exposed to violence, but that's a huge thing now. Unfortunately, Kentucky's lagging a little bit in our laws, and whether we don't recognize that as much. It's starting to change. In Indiana, they do. But children who are exposed to violence have all of those adverse childhood experiences, which drastically affects their development. Their neurodevelopment is, there's plenty of slides you can see on the limbic system, the emotional regulation, and the part that holds memory, the limbic system, reducing that structure by 40% if they're seeing violence over time or they're being neglected over time. It's a huge issue, so it is considered child abuse. We know it is, but our laws don't always reflect that. So their development is actually being affected a lot by this. Children can also be used when they're younger to tell on mommy. So if a child is just practicing her language or his language and accidentally tattles and says, mommy went to the grocery or mommy went here when mommy's not supposed to leave the house, then the child can be used in that way as well. And actually, you bring a good point about children getting in the way. We know as they get older, we have a lot of males, juveniles in the system who are there because they were protecting their mother from the male figure. A lot of African American young men who are in prison for that very thing, for killing the male partner or attacking, even though they're protecting the mom. So there's not a lot of protection for those kids, but they are oftentimes used as part of that cycle. Any other? There's plenty. We're not mentioning all of them. There's so many ways that that the children are used, but that's just a kind of a nice little snippet. We know that intimidation is also a huge part of that abuse cycle. There's a few clients, there's pretty famous stories, one of which, hello, come on in, yes. Are you here for domestic violence? Go ahead and sign in, that's okay. And then grab those 3 sheets and then you have the slides with you. So intimidation is a really key point because for those of you who have been in a romantic partnership, is it pretty obvious when your partner is upset? Can you tell? Well, how do you know when your partners are upset or they're bothered by something? How do you know?
Body language.
Body language, can you speak a little bit more to that?
They're upset or they have a look.
Right.
Is not their typical look.
Right, and we're 80% of our language transference is body language. It's gestures, it's how someone's face is. If there's a little twitch or something, we pick up on that. So you have an intimate knowledge just by knowing your partner when they're not happy. So this can be something that can be happening in public. No one else may be aware of it, but there's a sign that non-offending partner that something's going to go down because of something I did or something that they're not okay with. Some examples that we've heard from our art therapist was she was mentioning a client to me that had she knew she was going to be physically abused that evening if her partner left a daisy on the counter. I know, right? And that's such a innocuous symbol of usually kind of winsome romance, but in this situation it meant something clearly very different, and that was something that was very personal to her relationship. I was in LaGrange a few months back at a pregnancy center that was doing something similar to this, and a woman from the audience came up afterwards, and she was a survivor, and she disclosed to me that her ex-husband used to say to her, "I'm going to put pennies on your eyes," which is an old-timey kind of thing, right? They used to put pennies on dead bodies to keep their eyelids from coming up. And so they'd be like an Applebee's or something, and he would just push a penny towards her. And nobody would pick up on that. It's very much just about their relationship, but for her it meant something very threatening and ominous. So that was a big one for her. I did not mention sexual abuse, but let's say if all of these are kind of lighting up in here, depending on the relationship, what is the likelihood that the non-offending partner or the victim is consenting to sexual advances from her partner?
Very high.
Or his partner. Not very high. Not very high, probably not at all, right? So if you don't have any power and control in any other realm, or there's a huge imbalance, the likelihood that you are actively consenting, right? And consenting in that case might not even be that she's saying yes, but it's just that she's just saying, if I just let this happen, then I won't get pushed up against the couch or against the wall again. So this is very much just keeping things calm, but not actively wanting or saying they want it. Any questions about the power and control wheel? There are endless examples that we have not covered, and they're all very unique, but this kind of encompasses the vast majority of types of abuse that we do see in our clients, and no doubt you're seeing in your students too. Anybody want to share anything else before we move on? Okay. So now that we've kind of gone through the cycle or the power and control wheel, let's do a little examination of why might somebody stay? Why might somebody leave? Where is that? Oh, here we go. I'm going to turn this off briefly.
The AV button.
AV, okay. Not the power button. AV. Where's AV? Ah, there. Mute. Ah, perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead. Alrighty. All right, we'll stay right there. Okay, so let's examine why might somebody stay. Like, what is the risk, or what are the risks of staying? What are some of the risks of actually sticking it out and not leaving? What might somebody risk by staying?
Your life.
Okay. What else?
Whatever they're putting up with right now is going to get worse.
Okay, could get worse if you leave. Is that what you're saying? Could get worse if you leave, yeah. Okay, what else?
Your growth and development.
So growth and development will stop, right? Okay, so either stops or it goes down, right? More likely it's going to go down. What else?
Threats to other family members.
So there's threats if you stay. Risk of staying, yeah. Threats to other family. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I guess that would be the risk of leaving.
That's okay. So let's think about how this could be risk of staying. So if you stay, it could be threats. Well, yeah. Let's hold off. That's a little bit more of the other one. So let's think about how it affects the relationship with the outside family too.
The loss of those relationships.
There you go. How so? What would happen sometimes?
Well, one, you have the partners trying to isolate you from the family.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's how I would see it.
Yeah, because there's isolation from that family. There's also a sense of maybe there's been this back and forth where we know it takes about 7 to 10 times on average for someone to, if they're going to leave, finally leave that partner. So you can imagine that drama, that exhaustion of the family that's always there for that daughter or that son or whoever the victim is, and it just gets tiring. We just don't want to put up with it anymore. They don't understand the dynamics of that, what's going on, and it can seem very, very tiring. So loss of family from that way too. What else?
Well, it sort of ties in both your life and loss of family, but I know of one instance where a family member was killed trying to protect the person who's staying.
Okay, so there could be, yeah, exactly. So they could be killed, right? That's a great point, and we know that that can happen when you intervene in something that's violent. There could be some collateral damage. Absolutely.
Serious addiction from self-medication.
Absolutely, serious addiction from self-medication. So it could be the coping, or it could be that they're forced to do it.
Impact on the kids if you stay.
Right, and a lot of victims may say, go to the other room, go to the other room. There's a pretty famous scene from What's Love Got to Do with It, with the Tina Turner and Ike Turner story. Angela Bassett's amazing in this, but there's one scene that we kind of pull, and it's her 3 little boys, and he's dragging her to the bedroom, and she's saying, the older son, take them away, take them away, take them away. And he's got them there, but one of them's closing his eyes, the other one's doing this, and the other one's crying. You see this wide range of kids that are witnessing that, and that idea of that even if you just like push the kids into a room and they were to close the door, that they're not being harmed by that, it's completely false actually. But a lot of our victims, of course, don't know that. They're trying their best to do what's best for their kids under pretty terrible circumstances. But the fact is those kids they're still experiencing all that neurodevelopment issue, so. And emotional regulation and that sort of thing.
Again, related, in some cases, the kids they participate in the abuse.
Yep, so the kids will participate. So if a kid is being brainwashed, and we have another incident where there was a pretty famous Dateline video, but I think it was early aughts, of a husband and wife. The husband had forced the 13-year-old son to videotape the abuse. That's what you were thinking too. Yes, exactly. So actually engaging that child in the abuse, he was mimicking some of those same things that his father was saying to his mother. He was saying, "You deserve this. Why didn't you just make the lunch on time?" And so that brainwashing that happens, and then kind of setting that child up for becoming a perpetrator himself potentially down the road.
I know a case where a man had dosed himself with gasoline and said to a teenage child, "Go get me the lighter." And his wife said, "Don't get the lighter." And he said, "Get the lighter." So here's the kid going.
Yeah, really confused loyalty, right? Like who do I say? I mean, mommy, if I don't do this, mommy will get me. But daddy holds all the power. So sometimes they make that choice because it's the best choice for their safety. It's very conflicting, very conflicting. What other things? Yes. Oh, you're just.
By the way, there's the risk that the victim will internalize the vision of themselves as involved in the relationship.
Right. So like how they view themselves. Right, so they may have been really confident, and we hear a lot of clients who are like, I was really confident, and I stood up for myself, and then, over time, just that kind of breaking somebody's will down and their feelings of themselves can really, that they really, they adopt that vision. Risk of victim adopting, sorry, let me change that up. Adopting that vision, right, just really believing it. Absolutely, that's a big one. Which makes it really hard to leave, right? It's also you're not able to, if you don't think you can get out of there, this is all you deserve, then it's hard to leave.
Abusers often threaten suicide.
Yeah.
It'll be, if you leave, I'll kill myself.
Yep. That's right, and that's another.
Responsible for their behavior.
That's right, and that's another thing we didn't bring up with emotional abuse is that's another card to play. You're going to be responsible. My life's on your hands, right?
This kind of the way it goes on with loss of family, but I mean CPS taking your kids.
Absolutely. Now this is a big one too. We talk a lot of the healthcare. This is not so much relevant to your experience, but the CPS is a big one because we want to engage CPS. We want to engage people who make those calls to CPS, like medical workers and social service providers, that if you call on that parent, you might be inadvertently putting that non-offending parent in a position where they're going to lose their children. Now, how do you engage that, potentially that the mother, if it's more often than not, in this call so that you can reduce that opportunity for them taking the kids? If she's in on the call and she says this is domestic violence, then she has more power. So that's a challenging thing with the medical providers. So that list, again, could also continue on and on. But let's go ahead and look at the opposite. What are some of the risks of leaving an abusive relationship? We'll play it out for a little bit, but yeah, that's basically your right answer. You're already on it, but let's go ahead and just for the sake of argument, let's kind of illustrate a little bit more.
Your life.
Your life. Yeah, and we know.
Financial or financial security.
So yeah, financial security, that was another thing.
Which includes access to health care sometimes.
Absolutely. Sorry, what was the one after that?
Threats to the family.
Threats, thank you, homelessness too, that's a big one. Homelessness, that's a really important point because we know that the vast majority of women and children that are homeless are leaving a domestic violence situation. Okay? A lot of folks don't have support structures, right? They've either burned those bridges or have been effectively moved away from that support structure. They might have also not have enough financial wherewithal to get back to those family structures. This is a big one. Homelessness is a huge issue around DV.
The children being kidnapped.
Mm-hmm.
Or CPS making them do their business.
Yeah, exactly. Unfit mother, you're homeless, kids get taken. Right.
That's good for that.
That's a really great point. We know that a lot of victims don't leave because part of that abuse cycle is I'm going to hurt or kill your pet. So they love their pet like their child. They're not going to leave, right? We'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we do with the center and programs that we have that mitigate some of those things. What other things here?
Social embarrassment.
Absolutely. Thanks for hitting on that too. This is a big one, especially in our more religious communities, our rural communities, those where the fabric is really tied tight. It's embarrassing to say this happens, and embarrassing to admit it's been happening for a period of time. It's embarrassing that if you know, part of being married is there's a commitment there, and a lot of folks don't ever see themselves getting divorced, no matter how bad it gets. This is a real kick.
Some churches ask you to leave if you've been divorced. It's against some religions to be divorced.
Mm-hmm.
You're not asked to come back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to word that, but.
Well, maybe it's like a banishment, right? It's almost like that too.
Yeah, some churches will ask you to leave if you've been divorced.
I think there's also a risk that you won't be believed. Because
Huge, right?
the abusers are charming men.
That's right. They're usually charismatic. They're charming. They've fooled a lot of folks. We're working in churches now who we know that they're experiencing this, and those and sometimes they're well established in that church community, right? They might even be deacons, right? So that's part of that social status, right? The imbalance. That's a great point.
There's also I don't know where it fall really. It could fall in some, it related back to one's ability to trust others outside of that little circle
Yeah.
to where they could share information or concerns.
Right. So maybe, and they haven't been, if you don't, you kind of atrophy a little bit if you're not social, right? We lose it. Like if you're not active, you lose your muscles. We lose our social abilities if we're isolated, and, so maybe we just a lack of trust that's happening. You might have been really gregarious and outgoing, and now you're quiet and, not willing to be there.
Wondering, is he to let them?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. This is a paranoia too. Paranoia, and you make a great point there too, because there might have been safety in this dysfunction, right? The routine, we know it's really dysfunctional, but it's something you can count on. And now the leaving, everything's new, no safety, right? There's no safety in how you feel about yourself, or your new structures, or your lack of, all of these other resources that you're lacking. So this is a really unsafe space to be in as well. So, as you mentioned before, even though these are looking a little different, we could probably, pets could still be threatened here. All these things we didn't mention could still be listed in some way. So these are quite very similar. They're just kind of like, two different sides of the same coin, basically. And even in more cases, this is a big one because within the first 48 hours of leaving a partner, the risk of homicide is in the 90%. So really, really high chance of someone being killed if they leave. So this can even be easier. It can be easier to stay and probably safer for some folks. Any questions about why people stay, why they leave? Does it make sense more now? Yes?
I have another example. Years ago, a student disclosed to me that she was abused. And I was like, "Why did you seek some assistance?" And she said, "I come to know my husband. He's an elected city official."
Yep. Right.
And so he was very traumatized.
Right, and so that's the social standing, right? Somebody who's got a lot of power already. We know we have a lot of perpetrators in LMPD as well. This is the tricky part, right? Ray Rice's wife had the same issue. And did you see all that national dialogue, female and male dialogue on both sides of that fence? Why is she doing that? Why is she ruining his career? Why? And she didn't even do right. It wasn't her admission. It was somebody else's. So that was non-consensual. So she was thrown in the limelight. There's so much going on with that. But there's a lot of fear that or I can't do that because then all this light will be on him. He's already in the limelight. Big challenge.
Well, also part of this, they sometimes do not want to lose it themselves.
Bingo.
It's
Right.
not so much they're trying to protect the spouse, but they have come to be, they're so connected, they see themselves as the spouse.
Absolutely, that's just an enmeshment. I agree, absolutely. And their life is, I mean, after a while you have, whether, you know, it was fun or not fun, but something that you felt you had more control over or not, you are part of it. It's your history. So to step away from that is a huge...
Your identity, you lose your...
Absolutely. I mean, who are you after that point? Especially if you get up in age, it's like, well, that's my life, and I have to just, you know, I made my bed, so to speak. But although that's not really your fault. So that's a great point. It's really, really hard. Just to touch on this briefly, just so you have some knowledge of what domestic violence law looks like in the state, it's a Class A misdemeanor, so it tells you how we value what is ostensibly an issue of violence against women, which is not much. I think it's actually, I remember hearing about the issue with the, what was it, somebody that abused a dog at the Kentucky State Fair? Was it something, did you hear about this? And he got more time and more fines than somebody who's perpetrating domestic violence. So we treat animals better than we treat women in our society. We know that if someone does use weapon, so they use a gun or some other weapon, or strangulation, so choking is involved. This is a big one. Choking is a high indication of lethality. So somebody puts their hands on another person's neck non-consensually. So of course we're not talking about BDSM, which is bondage and submission. That's a different thing entirely. If it's non-consensual, it's a form of control. This is a sign that that person's likely to get killed by their partner. So we do recognize that. It does become a felony in Kentucky and Indiana. You'll see in Indiana, if a pet is harmed and if a child witnesses violence, it's considered the same. It's considered a felony. We're not quite there yet here in Kentucky. Typical punishment in Jefferson County, 90 to 180 days in jail. So this is what they get if they are convicted. And they have to do batterers intervention program. This is a 28-week program that is highly controversial. There's not a lot of data that shows that it's effective, namely because you have somebody who potentially grew up in a violent home, potentially, not always. It's about 50% of abusers grew up in violent homes, but those who were raised in abusive homes are more likely to become abusers themselves, so keep that in mind. But if they've grown up in that, or they've had all this time developing this perpetration behavior, 28 weeks with a group of other abusers is not going to necessarily help with that situation. Some people do, find that it's effective when they start a new relationship with somebody else, but if they go back to an old relationship, those grooves are quite set. And so this is highly controversial. We haven't had much results. It's the only intervention program we have for perpetrators. They're also not owning it. If you had to force somebody to take a class that they don't want to take, as opposed to something they really feel, great about, and we probably see that a lot with your mature learners who come back to school and are really there because they want it, as opposed to the people who just think they got to get that something, right? Same thing with perpetrators in this program, right? They don't own it. They're less likely to get anything from it. It's also very broad. It doesn't really hit at all the reasons why people perpetrate. It's a very kind of catch-all. So, it's not as effective. We know that people who have a protective order out against them cannot have a gun, so the sheriff will go and confiscate all firearms. There is new legislation for victims to carry guns in the city and state, which we are not a big fan of because we know that doesn't make someone safer if they have a gun on them. Sometimes it can be used against them.
Or they'll just go to prison for life.